In this video, I want to discuss remakes or remasters with some of the older Bethesda games. Most often, people discuss wanting remasters of New Vegas and Fallout 3, but even the likes of Morrowind and Oblivion. And although just recently, I've actually talked about why this might not be as easy as you think, or how there's some unforeseen problems along the way with some of these remasters, or even how Todd Howard himself actually describes not liking remasters.
Whereas I like remasters, I like the charm of the way it was
back then.
Personally, like when you watch an old movie.
Yeah.
All of this just changed with the recent Microsoft purchase, and as such, I think it's a very good and important time to revisit this topic. As one, there still is quite a bit of just confusion or almost misinformation. I think some people need some clarification on certain aspects of this deal, but even further, certain aspects of what it would take to remake one of these games. While doing the research for this video, I made some pretty interesting findings or observations that could put us in a unique situation where a remaster or remake could be not that far away. So overall, hopefully this video serves almost as a guide to the potential of a future Elder Scrolls or Fallout remake or remaster. So right off the bat, a huge reason for making this video is just the vast amount of speculation that's been there with Bethesda and Microsoft remastering one of the older games. This seemingly to be driven large in part due to Microsoft's willingness to revisit old franchises. But as we see this discussion go on, there's oftentimes a pretty big problem with it. We see users optimistically talk about the fact that a Fallout New Vegas and Fallout 3 bundle could come. I think many people see some of these large-scale mod projects recreating some of those games in the more modern engine and get excited at the potential of Bethesda doing it themselves and offering it up as a package. But the big issue is some of those games are really old. And you might be sitting there like, well, yeah, obviously. But more so than anything else, this is relevant on an engine level. Of course, people always make jokes about Bethesda continuing to use this old, broken, and outdated engine, but it does get updates or upgrades. Fallout 3, New Vegas, and Oblivion are on the Gamebryo engine. That was updated for Skyrim, Fallout 4, and Fallout 76 to the Creation engine. And although the two clearly have similarities, they also have fundamental differences, as you cannot simply port the content of the older games to the new engine. Talking with some of the people actually recreating these games in the more modern engine, they describe how things like NIF formats, scripts, and even some models and textures would just have to be totally redone. Some of that old stuff would not port over functionally or just looks kind of bad. Now some stuff of course is portable. There's some mods adding the world space from those older Fallout games into Fallout 4. Even further, we saw the Creation Club item of Fallout 3's GNR Plaza in Fallout 4. This seemingly was a port of the world space, but then several of the assets like the buses, rocks, and rubble were actually replaced with Fallout 4 updated versions. But the main takeaway of this is those people who want to see that Fallout New Vegas story, quest, and functionality, but with some of the features of Fallout 4, like the updated gunplay, like the settlement system, well, put simply, it's kind of a big ask because a lot of content would have to be recreated in the process of updating the engine of Fallout New Vegas. Although yes, you could port several aspects of that game, there's quite a bit that would have to be improved or changed. As far as a remaster goes for some of these older games, we large in part actually have that. This unfortunately being exclusive to PC users for the time being at least, thanks to modding, but you can overhaul the textures and visuals of Fallout New Vegas, adding in additional features like sprint or even just better mechanics overall. One of my favorite mods is just one that makes it so I could alt-tab in Fallout New Vegas, which is a huge help. When it comes to actual functional remakes from mod projects, we don't have much. Several are a work in progress. You have Project Oreo, Fallout 4, the Capital Wasteland Project, Fallout 4 New Vegas, and even stuff like Sky Oblivion on the side of Skyrim, but all of those have yet to be released. And really what those authors are doing is looking at the old game and remaking everything from the ground up, which as you can imagine is a overwhelming amount of work, and most of them are still pretty far off from release. OpenMW is a pretty interesting one. It actually is a totally new engine, as you can imagine, made for Morrowind originally, and it adds in some new features, additional functionality. There's actually some multiplayer in the works for this, but hypothetically, other games could be ported to this engine also. So even though right now it's just for Morrowind, Skyrim could come to it, and even things like Fallout have had tests on this engine. But the overall takeaway is, if you want a proper, true to form Fallout Fallout New Vegas, but with all of the bells and whistles of Fallout 4, that is a considerable undertaking. A lot of stuff would have to be built from the ground up, so it's not like a smaller support studio could just be casually thrown on it. There's going to be a lot of money and investment in that. Bethesda could use, or rather reuse, a lot of those old assets, but there's a lot more to the games than that. But something interesting is, with this recent Microsoft acquisition, we are now in an interesting setting, or even with what games could get a remaster or remake. Microsoft seems very welcome and open to remastering their older games. We do have Halo the Master Chief Collection, all 3 of the Age of Empire games, and even Wasteland Remastered. Wasteland Remastered being an interesting one in that it was a studio Microsoft acquired, but then ended up going forward with the publishing of that remaster of their older game. But large in part with all 3 of those examples, what you see are visual upgrades, additional functionality on modern hardware, higher resolution support, and some back-end improvements, but it's still the same game. It just looks better and at points plays a bit smoother. But as we do know that Microsoft thinks the deal with Bethesda will be finished in the second half of their fiscal year 2021, which in layman terms is the first half of 2021 for everybody else. Microsoft's fiscal year is not a typical year. It does open some interesting doors for Microsoft giving that kind of treatment with the Age of Empires, Wasteland Remastered, or Halo the Master Chief Collection to some of Bethesda's titles. Right off the bat, one of the good justifications for this is it is a way to monetize this IP for the $7.5 billion purchase, where you otherwise really wouldn't be. You do have ESO and Fallout 76, but otherwise there are no new Elder Scrolls or Fallout games on the horizon for the foreseeable future. I would say the Elder Scrolls 6 is at least 4 years at minimum away at this point, and even that might be a little bit conservative. But one of the ways Microsoft can very easily make use of some of these older IPs is actually with mod support. And a great example of this, of course, is Skyrim Special Edition. Skyrim came out in the older gen of consoles. It got updated by Bethesda, having some back-end improvements. It looked slightly better in game, but really the big selling point, which was obvious by the fact that it was free on PC, was that on consoles you could actually now download mods for Skyrim. And that's not something to downplay, as with just that singular feature edition, Bethesda was able to sell a 5-year-old game for $60. And even still, now 4 years after this initially came out, it is the 33rd most played game on Xbox right now, above Fallout 4, and it still costs $40 if you actually want to buy it on Xbox. So for the amount of work that went into creating Skyrim Special Edition, this otherwise relatively simple remaster, with the big selling point being mods on consoles, Bethesda likely made a ton of money on this, and I'm sure Microsoft's aware of that. But what makes this discussion even a bit more interesting is in when you consider how Skyrim Special Edition came to be. So of course, as you saw earlier in this video, Todd Howard explicitly said he doesn't really like remasters. So why then do we have Skyrim Remastered with Skyrim Special Edition? Well, it was actually an internal test. While working on Fallout 4, Bethesda wanted to test having one of their games on the next gen of consoles. At the time, internally, that was the transition from the Xbox 360 to the Xbox One era. So the first thing they did was test porting Skyrim to the next gen of consoles. And in doing so, they added some upgrades to it and eventually ended up retailing that for Skyrim Special Edition. But large in part, it was just a test internally by them. Now, of course, I'm sure many of you are connecting the dots in that we are in a very similar time right now. Internally, Bethesda is working on Starfield. When Starfield development began, it was likely on the last gen of consoles back in 2016, but really full production in 2018, years ago. So likely, Bethesda just went through the same test of porting a game to the next gen internally, like with Fallout 4 this time, just seeing how everything could work on the next gen. So now on one hand, that could create a very interesting situation with a Fallout 4 Special Edition, improved visuals, perhaps expanded mod support. I still have this tinfoil hat theory where we could see a Fallout 4 Special Edition with co-op. I mean, they did just create a total engine upgrade, adding multiplayer into this same engine, port Fallout 4 to the updated Fallout 76 engine, and suddenly you have a multiplayer Fallout. That could be kind of crazy as a special re-release of Fallout 4. But of course, even more hypothetical, some of these older games coming to next gen as a result of this. And that's where I think we could actually see something happen here. Take something like the Elder Scrolls 4, or even Fallout New Vegas. Add some backend improvements, perhaps make it 64-bit, support additional RAM, some additional visual improvements, but of course, in the end, the big selling point is modability on consoles, something we have never seen for either of those older games, but something Bethesda clearly has the framework for. We have Bethesda.net, which has now been functional for several years, and likely they're looking at ways to expand it with Fallout 76, so it's not like it's something that has just been abandoned or ignored. And considering how many copies Skyrim Special Edition sold, you have to imagine this is definitely something they're at least considering. Technically, really could have happened at any point, but I think the Microsoft acquisition makes this even all the more likely. Microsoft has already produced several remasters of their games. They have this very valuable franchise that is otherwise sitting dormant. You'd think they want to monetize that. And of course, a ton of support studios that they could kind of just throw manpower at this, or even have one of these smaller support studios handle it. The giant value associated with this is the big backlog of mods you already have on PC. Similar to what we saw with some of those other games, you could just have a ton of PC mods be slightly converted or edited to function on consoles. So overall with this one, it could be a little bit too speculative for some of you, but I tried to ground it in fact or reality, things that have actually happened from these companies, and why I think there's big potential for us to see something. Now, whether or not that ends up being a New Vegas remastered or even just a Fallout 4 special edition, but either way, to me, it definitely seems like something that would be financially viable for this cooperation between Bethesda and Microsoft. Microsoft having the manpower, Bethesda once owning the IPs, but now soon Microsoft will own them, or even just with Bethesda's 4 studios. Maybe one of them is already working on one of these. In all likelihood, you wouldn't see something like this come out in 2021, or at least not late 2021. It definitely seems like Starfield is coming next year, and you're not going to want to compete with your giant new AAA game with one of these remasters. But to me, I feel pretty confident in saying that a remaster will probably happen at some point. 2022 seems likely, or who knows, maybe earlier in 2021 we get a surprise release of one of these. Either way, hopefully you guys found this video informative. I think the remaster situation with next gen is a very interesting one. It'll be interesting to see how this Bethesda Microsoft deal plays out, but to me, a potential remaster is one of the things I'm most excited for. One of the best outcomes from this relationship overall. Yeah, of course, New Vegas 2 would be awesome, but that would be so far down the line, at least 3 years of development time, where something like this could get started in just a couple of months and come quite a bit earlier. As always, again, I thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.